meeting of the Norwich Area Museums Committee, which is the first one of the civic year, and as such, the first item is appointment of chair. The chair is usually a member of the City Council and also a member on the joint committees. So we only have 2 who are eligible for that at the moment. So may I ask for nominations, please, from the floor, please? Councillor Riley?
I nominate Councillor Huntley.
Thank you. So one nomination, Councillor Huntley. Any seconders?
Correct, second that.
Okay, and with no others forward, may I put you to the vote, please? And Chair, that looks like it's unanimous. Thank you. And I hand over to the new chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Is that?
Button on that one.
Yes.
Thank
you very much, Councillor Wright. I wouldn't have worked that out. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Jackie, for covering that. My first action as chair then for this civic year is the appointment of the vice chair. She can't be here today, but I'd like to propose Councillor Baltic-Colton as the vice chair again.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. And if we could take a vote on that, please. Again, that's a unanimous vote. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, so we move on to item 3 here, which is apologies. As I've just said, I'm aware of apologies from Councillor Baltic-Colton. Jackie, do we have further apologies?
We have apologies from Councillor King and Councillor Kybert, who's on other council business, I understand. I'm afraid I haven't heard from Councillor Watkins or Councillor. I presume that he's not coming in, Councillor Wright. No, or Councillor Rumsby. It may be that their appointments were only made yesterday.
Councillor Osborne sends his apologies.
Just
received
Great, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to item 4. I understand we don't have any public questions or petitions, so we'll move on to item 5, which is declarations of interest. If anybody does have any declarations of interest. No, great. In that case, we can move on to item 6, which is the minutes from the last Norwich Area Museums committee meeting. This is on page 5 of the report, or starts on page 5 of the report. Is everybody happy with the minutes as they're presented? Yes, I'm taking that as silent assent. Thank you very much, everybody. In which case, we now move up to item 7 for today's committee meeting. Robin, if I could invite you to give us the report for the period covering February to April of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So the report in front of you covers, as the Chair mentions, the period February to April. And in section 1, I'll just pick up a few highlights, really. So in section 1, you've essentially got the position in regard to how the service has been responding to the pandemic. And section 1.1 is the key one in terms of really sort of pointing out that as a museum service, we continue to sort of ensure that visitors and staff can be kept safe. Obviously in a very different environment now with the ending of all legal restrictions. That said, we continue to provide, as you would expect, hand sanitizer stations, directional signage, and encouraging our visitors to maintain respectful distancing. During the pandemic, members will recall that we were requiring visitors to pre-book. That's no longer a requirement. We're seeing the vast majority of our visitors attending on a sort of drop-in basis, but we do still encourage people to pre-book, particularly at busier times. And in terms of sites across the service, our capacities have pretty much returned to pre-pandemic levels. Section 1.3, one of the key limitations for us, mindful that across the service, including here in Norwich, we occupy historic buildings, that don't often lend themselves to a number of sort of the procedures that support infection control. One of the real challenges for us has been around maintaining good ventilation. Again, mindful that as museums we don't traditionally tend to open windows or keep doors open. So we have been, throughout the pandemic, being very creative, and real credit to the staff for coming up with solutions that enable us, wherever possible, to provide well-ventilated spaces. And we are now actively monitoring our priority spaces across the service using CO2 detectors that plug into the county-wide LoRaWAN network that enable us to monitor what's going on in the individual rooms and then make informed choices about things like occupancy levels. And to cut to the chase, what that has meant is we've been able, on the back of that data, to increase occupancy levels within a number of key spaces across museums, whether in public areas or back office, but doing so with the confidence that we're still maintaining good levels of ventilation for staff and volunteers. And that's been particularly helpful as we've looked to bring staff back into office areas, storage areas, many of which don't have access to sort of natural ventilation. We have also been able to bring back more of our volunteers, which has obviously been really welcome, and we are now seeing indoor volunteers returning on a phased basis across the service. So we'll obviously keep monitoring the situation carefully, and we're trying as always to find that sort of sensible balance in terms of ensuring that we're minimising risks to staff and volunteers, but also reflecting that we want to return to business as usual as soon as possible. So I'll pause there, Chair, if there are any questions on COVID.
Thank you very much, Robin, for that. Are there any questions on this initial part of the report? No. Robin, if I could invite you to carry on with the report then, please.
Thanks, Chair. At this point, hand over to Stuart Garner, the Norwich Operations Manager, who will introduce the next section.
Thank you, Robin. Excuse me. The next section, the reopening at Norwich Museum, is a section that we've included for some time in the committee reports regarding the opening arrangements, taking into account not only COVID-19, but of course also facilitating the key project. So it's as we were with regards to the entrance arrangements or access arrangements to Norwich Castle. We're still using the E8, what was emergency exit door, as an entrance to the castle. And we still have a reduced offer with regards to catering and retail. You can see there's a photo there where we are still operating with a temporary catering unit, but a more enhanced retail offer. As we came out of COVID-19, it allowed us to sell many more lines of stock than we did previously. So it's good to be able to see that moving forwards. And of course, this is in advance of us being able to have our new catering and retail units coming online in the next 6 to 12 months. Moving on to section 2.2, castle ceremony arrangements. What I've included here is a full 12-month period of ceremonies at Norwich Castle. These are the ceremonies, both weddings and civil partnerships. And the footfall that those ceremonies have contributed towards the overall visitor numbers at Norwich Castle. We didn't start operating weddings again until May of last year, and although April falls into this financial year, I included it there because it demonstrates a full 12 months of ceremonies. And as you can see, in that 12 months, there were 728 ceremonies, which contributed 15,414 additional visitors to Norwich Castle. Which you can see at the end there, particularly for April of this year, was the busiest month of those 12 months, with 99 ceremonies in one calendar month, with 2,494 visits, which shows the confidence levels are increasing as more and more people are starting to get married post-COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Just a very quick question. In terms of the number of ceremonies and the footfall, obviously that represents the period coming out of COVID, etc. How does that compare to before we went into COVID in 2020? Are we getting back to where we were? Is it better than it was?
We're actually, the numbers, excuse me, in terms of numbers of people coming through the door are slightly down, which is why it's encouraging to see April 2,494 and 99. We averaged around the kind of 600 mark, but normally in April it would have been very quiet. So this year is a bit different. So we're on more or less on par in terms of ceremonies, but it's the footfall which is down because early on last year we went through a phased period of initially we'd only had 12 people within the ceremony, we then increased that to 30, and then most lastly in March we increased it back to 50, apologies, 50 people per ceremony. So we're now starting to see that footfall increase. So the ceremonies are an indicative figure of the number of people having ceremonies, but it's that footfall that we're now starting to see increase.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Stuart, on that. Robin, if I could hand back to you for the next part of the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. And as members are aware, we said farewell to our learning manager, Helen Lunnan, at the end of March, and we currently have temporary line management arrangements in place to support the Norwich learning team. So Jan Pittman, who is the learning manager, who normally covers the west of the county, is supporting the Vista Programme team at Norwich Castle, and Colin Stott, who's the learning manager, normally based in Great Yarmouth, is supporting the schools team. So it ensures that those staff based in Norwich Castle and supporting activities at Strangers in the Museum in Norwich continue to have professional management support while we're without the Norwich Learning Manager post. In section 3.1, you've got a summary there of schools activity, and it's been very pleasing, both in Norwich and across the wider service actually, to see the speed at which schools have resumed making visits to Norwich Museum Service sites. I think it's testimony to the fact that schools are sort of clear about the benefits of coming to our museums in terms of the quality learning experience and also the sort of way in which those activities are managed. And we've really seen that throughout the pandemic. And schools were, at a time when you were amazed they were just functioning as schools, they were very keen to add a complexity in terms of making visits to museums. So I think it is real testimony to the long-term relationship that our learning teams have across North Museum Service with the schools in Norfolk. And that sort of strong relationship has continued as we've come out of the pandemic, and we've seen really good levels of interest from schools. And although the castle has slightly limited capacity because of the ongoing construction works, we have been fully booked by schools throughout the autumn and spring term, and that reflects the position we're seeing at other sites across the service. In addition to strong demand for the sort of traditional core schools programmes at the castle, the Romans and Mycenaean Egyptian sessions, we've also seen really good demand developing for the schools programme at Strangers Hall, which is based on the Great Fire of London, and also activities focusing on the Museum of Norwich. And the Norwich Learning team have done a lot of work actually to improve and extend the range of the offer at the smaller sites in Norwich. So there's lots of information in the report about some of the school's activities and some feedback from teachers. Also to point out, section 3.2, that one of the positive legacies of the pandemic is the increased level of skills and confidence our teams have in using and developing digital resources. Clearly, during the lockdown periods, a lot of our schools' delivery was being delivered remotely, was happening remotely. And while schools have been very keen to come back to physical site visits, a lot of those digital resources are now supporting those schools in terms of and post-visit activities. So it means we can offer the schools a sort of extended experience using those digital resources. And for those schools that still want to engage remotely, that offer remains available. So really pleased with how the schools programme is looking at the moment, and very confident that we'll be able to sort of rebuild the schools offer across the service over the coming months. Section 3.3 outlines the very busy visitor programme.
Robin, could I just pause there for a moment? Councillor Schmier, was there a point you wanted to raise in this part of the
Yeah, it's
report?
back to the 3.1 about the Strangers' Hall and the life at the time of the Great Fire of London. It's funny if you could tell me, and probably the committee as well, a bit more about that. Just personally, I've never been that interested in the restoration period of 1666, but what made that so exciting for the kids?
I think it was, and forgive me, I may need to defer to others in terms of providing a bit more detail on this, and we'd be happy to do that after the meeting, of course. This, I think, was where the learning team were looking to see the opportunities for a site like Strangers to actually plug into the national curriculum. And the Great Fire of London provided that route into the national curriculum, and obviously Strangers' Hall is contemporary with that event. So it's really focusing on making the most of the asset that is that Tudor building, but also putting it into a historical context, which then does make it relevant in terms of the national curriculum. We always know that a visit to Strangers' Hall is really good for the kids, because it's recreated as a Tudor space, and the building itself is wonderful. So it's a very rich experience. The challenge was always how it then tied into the national curriculum. So the schools having to justify making a trip. The learning outcomes are clearly a key part of that. So that time of the curriculum is really important. And without it, the likelihood is you wouldn't see anything like that level of visits. Something we have offered to committee members in the past, Chair, which we'd be very happy to facilitate again, is the opportunity to go and observe school sessions across the Norwich museums. Certainly members have done that in the past and found it, I think, very interesting, and if there's a particular session that you would like to observe, we'd be delighted to facilitate that, because it's probably much better than me talking about it, is to actually see it happening. So if members of the committee would like us to share some date options for that, Chair, we'd be very happy to do so. And then we could also engineer meetings with the learning officers who actually developed and delivering those programmes. But I think for me it's a really good example of how it's very easy actually not to be offering schools activities at Strangers' Hall, because the alignment with the national curriculum isn't straightforward. But they were very creative in terms of ensuring that those links could be made in what is a very competitive environment for school visits, and mindful of the challenges schools face when having to justify visits to sites. And without that, a very clear connection with the curriculum, I think, as I say, we would struggle. So, Chair, we would be very happy to circulate dates for sessions, and if members would like to join, we'd be very pleased to welcome them.
Thank you very much. I think we would appreciate it if the dates could be circulated. Councillor Ward.
Yes, thank you. Just to comment on the Great Fire of London. I think it's 5 years ago, it was the 600th anniversary, and myself as chairman of Norfolk County Council and your Lord Mayor, Marion Maxwell, were invited down to London by the Lord Mayor for the evening's activities for the celebration of the 600 years. And the reason Norfolk was invited was because immediately after the Great Fire there was a national appeal for funds to help all the homeless people in London who'd been displaced by the fire. And Norwich and Norfolk together were one of the biggest contributors to that fund.
Thank you very much for that interesting detail. Councillor Thomas.
Having worked in schools, I do understand how difficult it is for schools to take time out to go on visits. So it's excellent that the theme was woven into the curriculum. Was that a one-off, or when you're planning, do you sort of ensure that you've got several teams to tie into the curriculum?
Thank you. It's a really important point, actually, and that's critical to the success of our schools programme. And our learning teams in Norwich and actually across NMS are really experienced at sort of working with teachers to develop a programme that's actually relevant and for which there's clearly going to be a demand. So the programme, whilst it contains sort of some of those more traditional sessions like Romans and Egyptians, which still remain important in the curriculum, you know, the learning team have been very proactive at working with schools to develop new offers, and that's both at primary and secondary level. So a good example of that would be a session like Storming the Castle, which is aimed at Key Stage 3, so sort of first years of secondary, and it's a maths-based session that uses the castle and the stories attached to it to enable the kids to have a very different experience of using maths in a historical setting. And that session was developed working with teachers, including the history lead at the school I'm going for, which is Litcham, and our learning staff have very good connections with Norfolk school teachers, who both get involved in planning but also piloting testing. So often if a new session is being developed, it'll be done in conjunction with teachers that have made use of the castle or other sites before. And then where it's a new session, it will often be piloted with schools that we know have a sort of interest in the sites and the topics, to ensure that the session, when it's sort of promoted and marketed more broadly, is going to tick the boxes that frankly teachers need to tick to enable them to justify that visit out. And the relationship with the national curriculum is critical, and without it, it's much harder work to get schools to come in. So the programme is constantly evolving to reflect the changes that take place in the curriculum. But I think the key to that is the sort of ongoing dialogue with teachers to make sure that what we offer continues to be relevant, because if it wasn't, those school numbers would go through the floor very quickly. So it's always, as I'm sure you appreciate, very demanding to do that, and it means that our learning staff have to stay on the front foot to make sure that what they're offering is relevant and continues to be relevant in a very fast-changing environment.
Thank you for that. Before we move on to the next part of the report, I just want to say I do appreciate the feedback that's been included in the report here. It's a great endorsement of what's being offered to the school children. Over to you, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll pass that on, and just to make members aware that we do evaluate all of our schools programmes and indeed all of our visitor programmes more broadly, and our learning teams have consistently high quality evaluation, and we've recently been reassessed for the Sanford Award, which is the sort of gold standard for museum education, and we're awaiting the outcome of that report for Norwich Castle, and we're quietly confident that's going to be another Sanford Award, which just demonstrates the quality of what the teams achieve, and those sort of quotes are sort of just a snapshot of some of the evaluation that we get. But we do get also constructive, could do better stuff as well, and clearly that's taken on board and is used to inform the programme. Section 3.3 outlines the broad range of the sort of wider visitor programme, delivered again primarily through the learning teams in Norwich, with some real highlights, particularly linking into the Norwich Castle Development Project. Alongside the construction works and the creation of new galleries, we also have a 4-year activity programme being delivered, funded primarily through the National History Heritage Fund, and events like the Art Court We Love and Keep It Regal are citywide sort of manifestations of that activity programme. So it's enabled us to try some very creative new things and really plays to the strengths of our learning teams in terms of that very creative approach to interpreting the story of our buildings and collections. And the Art Report We Love, which was part of the Floodlight Festival, is a really good example of that. And there's information in the report about what was a really successful event despite Storm Eunice wiping out one of the nights, unfortunately. We were touching on the use of digital in the context of schools, and I've included a link to the Unstitched audio series, which complemented the Textile Treasure exhibition that ran at Norwich Castle earlier this year. And it's another example of the way in which our visitor programme teams are using digital media to support interpretation and to make different stories accessible to audiences, not just those who come into the museum. I've also included details of the public launch of Norwich Tales, which is one of the citywide events linked to the Norwich Castle activity plan. And we've heard about this programme before, but in the report details of the different elements that made up the Norwich Tales, the early years work by Rose Feather, which has now resulted in kit bags being available to families with early years children coming into the museum to enable them to get more out of their visit. We've also got the downloadable poetry trail created by poet Daisy Henwood working with a group of young people, and we've also got the film resources relating to the bed making Norwich Tale, which recreated history of care at Lazar House. So these are our sort of long-term legacy, if you like, for public-facing events, and very much sort of underpin the way in which the Norwich Castle project is extending well beyond the walls of the construction site. Also in this section, a bit of information about our public guided tours. Again, these were affected during COVID, and we had to suspend guided tours because it involves our staff being very close to visitors, as you would expect. But we have now been able to re-energise the public guiding tours at the Castle, Museum of Norwich and Strangers Hall, and those are largely delivered by our learning assistants who form part of our learning team. And again, there's some quotes there from people who've been party to those guided tours. So quite a bit of information there, Chair, about the visitor programme. Moving on to section 3.4 in this section. Kick the Dust, which I'll come on to talk about in a while. You've got here in section 3.4 an update of some of the Norwich specific activities relating to Kick the Dust, which is our youth engagement project aimed at children and young people between the ages 11 and 25. And section 3.4 includes some examples of activity taking place under the Kick the Dust banner in Norwich, including the Castle Curators, who are a group of young people who've had some wonderful opportunities through Kick the Dust, but have also given an awful lot back to us. So they've had some really great chances to get behind the scenes, have a hard hat tour, go down to meet curators at the British Museum, really get involved, really hands-on involvement with developing new content for the Norwich Castle galleries, and also actively helped out with community exhibitions for the Castle on Tour programme, which included exhibitions at St Peter Mancroft, the Millennium Library, and currently at the Museum in King's Lynn. So a really active group of young people supported by not only Rachel Daniel, the Kick the Dust project worker, but also the project curator for the Norwich Castle redevelopment. And there's a YouTube link there to give you a feel for some of the opportunities they've had. So before I go on to talk about the Kick the Dust project more broadly, Chair, I'll pause there if there are any questions.
Are there any questions, comments, queries on that previous part of the report? No, then Robin, if I could hand back to you to carry on.
Thank you, Chair. So section 4 contains the regular update of the Kick the Dust project county-wide. So a reminder that Kick the Dust is funded primarily through the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and it's delivered in partnership with YMCA Norfolk and Creative Collisions, which is a youth forum based in Great Yarmouth. The project commenced in October 2018 and really came into its own, I think, during the pandemic, where it was able to maintain really active engagement with young people, even in the most challenging of times. You have within the report information on Kick the Dust up to the 28th of April. I've got with me a sort of an update that was produced after this report was published. So in terms of the headline statistics, since the project started in October 2018, we've seen 11,920 interventions involving 3,905 individual young people, involved in over 6,000 hours of quality activity. And that's taken us well beyond the initial target of 8,000 interventions that was agreed as part of the original Heritage Fund activity plan. So already about 4,000 beyond that target. And as it stands, 82% of the activities being delivered now by the project involve young people in leading and designing roles for those activities. So the project has really sort of evolved from a project being delivered to young people to a project being led by young people. And we've also seen that in the composition of the steering group, which now has 6 young people sitting on it as young ambassadors and representatives of the youth board. So it's a project members will be familiar with from previous reports, and if any members want any more information about it or opportunities within your own wards and divisions, I'd be very happy to put you in contact with the Kick the Dust project coordinator, Christine Marsden. But a really exciting project and one that continues to deliver. We are now seeing a lot more of the Kick the Dust activity delivered face to face. But there are still opportunities for digital engagement for young people, some of whom continue to be sort of anxious, and also it enables us to maintain contact with young people outside of Norfolk who engaged with the programme when we were relying on remote access. Within the report, as with previous versions, you've got more detailed information about the breakdown of participants, and those continue to show that this project really actively engages with some of the most challenging young people who wouldn't perhaps normally see museums and heritage as being remotely relevant to their lives. So something like 34% of engagements remain with YMCA clients. And we have seen, not surprisingly, an increase in young people reporting mental health issues who were involved with the project, and that's now something like 90% of participants report mental health issues as part of their confidential evaluation at the end of their activities. We've also included, as previously, comparison data showing how the Kick the Dust Norfolk project is comparing against other similar Kick the Dust projects funded by the National Heritage Fund elsewhere in the country. The Norfolk project is one of 12, and as you'll see from the comparisons, as has been the story throughout the project, we've continued to perform above the average on the majority of indicators. It's not a competition, clearly. It's all about the quality and engagement, but I think this gives reassurance that the project team continue to work actively to provide opportunities for young people and continue to develop new partnerships. We are looking to the future now of Kick the Dust in terms of funding. The current Heritage Fund funding runs until the end of March 2023, sorry, end of March 2023. We are actively working with another Kick the Dust project hosted by YMCA Leicester on a joint bid to the Heritage Fund. We've had encouraging words from the Heritage Fund to work with them, and we're at the stage of beginning to put together an expression of interest for the Heritage Fund ahead of a round one bid being submitted. And I'm actually later on this afternoon meeting with colleagues from Leicester YMCA to discuss the next steps of that joint bid. And the week before last, we actually hosted a group of young people from YMCA Leicester in Norfolk, and they were able to join some of our young people to engage in activities in Norwich, Kings Lynn and Great Yarmouth. So as a service, we're very sort of committed to maintaining momentum with this programme, which has been really critical in terms of the quality of the offer to young people, but has also seen our own staff significantly benefiting. And there's been significant investment in staff training and development to increase confidence in staff in all parts of the organisation to work with young people and to work in partnership with them to develop new activities. I'll pause there, Chair.
Thank you, Robin. Councillor Kidman.
It sounds like an absolutely fantastic project, and I'd like to, if that's possible, to speak to Christine Morrison, is it? I'd love to find out more about the project, particularly in terms of how project leaders manage to engage with really hard to reach beneficiaries, particularly as we're coming out of restrictions to do with COVID now, and I read in the minutes that transport was one of the main restrictions and how that's being overcome. And yeah, great stuff. Love to speak to Christine more. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, certainly I'll pass on your details, Councillor Kidman, to Christine Morrison.
Just to say, this has been an absolutely excellent initiative, and again, the feedback demonstrates really what people are getting out of this. So, great to hear that this might be carrying on with the partnership that you've outlined. We look forward to hearing something more of that. Councillor Ward.
Yes, well, I think what you said about what a worthwhile project this is. And I did spend half a day at the castle myself with some of the young people and saw exactly what was happening. So I would recommend that to any councillors who haven't done it.
Thank you very much. Okay, Robin, if I could invite you to carry on with the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Moving on to section 5 of the report, in Norwich Castle project update. Obviously, some members of the committee were able to join a behind-the-scenes hard hat tour ahead of our last meeting, but one. And Chair, we're just sort of interested to look at opportunities to repeat that, perhaps ahead of the September meeting, if that was acceptable, to provide that opportunity to members. I think we'll be at an interesting phase then in terms of some of the key stages of sort of milestones, if you like, of the project going forward. So when members were last visiting the castle in the keep itself, they would have seen most of the interior area cleared out. We're just putting the final stages now to preparing for the installation of the main steelwork structures within the keep, sort of horizontal and vertical steels, and I would hope that work would be well in train at the time of the next meeting, so that would be a really interesting opportunity, I think, for members to really get a feel for the shape of the interior of the keep once the steelwork structures are going in.
Thank you very much for that invitation, Robin. Can I get a sense from members whether people would be happy to revisit? I think it was really fascinating seeing the space cleared last time, so yes, if we could take you up on that invitation for ahead of the September meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Very happy to facilitate that. So in the keep itself, as I say, the main works have been focusing on preparing for the main steelwork structures. So that's included completion of all the sort of foundation elements. So we've just recently poured the concrete bases for the lift shaft and the main stairwell. We're also doing the very careful preparation of the points in where the steel will interface with the historic fabric, and of course at every stage working closely with colleagues from Norwich City Council's Conservation Officer team and also from the property team in their role as landlords representative, and continuing to liaise, as you would expect, with Historic England, both in terms of listed building and scheduled monument consents. In the adjacent area to the keep, what will become the new sort of toilet block and pop-up cafe area, this is the first area that's going to be handed back to us, which should be at the end of the summer, end of August, beginning of September. So this will provide the much needed new toilet facilities that will help us meet the needs of what we expect to be 100,000 additional visits once the project is complete. The toilet facilities will also include accessible toilets and a changing place, which we think is a really important addition to our offer at the castle. And accessibility is absolutely key to this project. So that will be the first section handed back to us at the end of the summer, and that will include toilets, accessible toilets, changing place, and the pop-up cafe that will service the rotunda at busy times to supplement the main cafe restaurant, which will be part of the second phase of handback, which we're expecting to be ahead of Easter the next year, so Easter 2023. And works in that area, which is the new entrance, the new shop, cafe area, are progressing well. Demolition work is taking place as we speak in the old shop area. The contractors have also been very carefully preparing to swivel the Boardman stone stairs, which members may recall faced you when you went into the original entrance, to actually create the new stair alignment, which will follow the original Norman stair line up the outside of the keep. So that very careful demolition work is taking place. What's also been going on over the last few weeks is very careful additional investigation of the Bygod Tower, the flint-faced Bygod Tower that houses the stair, and understanding the detailed fixing arrangements for the new glass roof that will sail over the entrance area. So very careful investigative works, again working closely with City Council colleagues to ensure that the best solution is found that meets the needs of both the new structures but also respects the historic fabric. We're also continuing to do a lot of work on the exhibition elements, so in very good progress now being made working with colleagues from the British Museum. So curators from Norwich Museum Service have now been down to London. They've got their hands on the objects that the British Museum is lending us on long-term loan to create the British Museum Gallery, which will be one of only a handful of British Museum permanent galleries outside of London. So that's really exciting. We're continuing to finalise the detailed design work for all of the cases that will form part of the new galleries. In other areas at the site, work taking place on final designs for the new cafe, and Stuart's been very much involved in leading that work. Also our new retail space, final designs have been concluded for that, and we've also recently finalised arrangements for the new ticketing systems that will enable people to move seamlessly around the museum. In terms of dates, essentially still on track in terms of the dates we've shared with you at previous meetings. So we're looking at the first, the main entrance, shop, cafe areas back with us for Easter of next year, and then we're expecting construction works to be completing in September of next year on the main keep itself, to be followed by exhibition fit out. So realistically, sort of soft openings at the beginning of 24, and all bells and whistles for Easter 24. So still in line with the dates that we've shared at previous meetings. I'll pause there, Chair, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Robin. Councillor Schmira, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. One is about sort of obviously material costs and things like that. Has that affected the budget considerably, and sort of who's picking up the tab for that? And then the other question is about the British Museum gallery that you mentioned. Is that going to be, forgive my ignorance here, you probably covered it in previous meetings, but is it going to be largely focusing on sort of Norman and Anglo sort of period artefacts, or is it a sort of cross-section of British history? Could you maybe give a bit more details about that, please?
Certainly. So in terms of the first part of the question, this is an interesting time to be undertaking a complex construction project, I think it's fair to say. And we are sort of affected, as other sort of construction projects are, by the sort of very volatile position at the moment within the construction industry, and that includes supply chain, so elements like steel, along with other materials, and it changes on an almost daily basis, it seems. We have been fortunate that the main contractor for this project, Morgan Sindall, are obviously very good players, so they are more cushioned, I think, for some of those vagaries on supply chain than a smaller contractor might be. But we have been affected by inflationary pressures. As members may be aware, we did go back to the Heritage Fund last year for a grant increase request, and back at the beginning of 2020 we did secure additional funding from Norfolk County Council, and those uplifts did include obviously additional contingencies, and we're continuing to sort of monitor the position really carefully. It is difficult, I think it's fair to say. We are looking at sort of value engineering options as well to try and offset some of those pressures. But as it stands, we're within budget, and obviously alert to the pressures that we're facing. But yeah, it's a tricky time. In terms of the British Museum gallery, the gallery will focus on the medieval period, but it will very much be looking at Norwich and Norfolk in a national and international context. So it will be supplementing our own collections, which are fantastic, but it will be very much bringing in, I think it's sort of high 60s of individual objects from the British Museum. It was 67 objects. And a number of those will put the medieval world into an international setting. So connections with the Arab world in terms of scientific instruments, for example, astrolabes, but also looking at sort of trade networks within Europe and beyond. And the British Museum collections will really sort of strengthen that ability to not only celebrate the fact that Norwich was, as you said earlier, the second city, and in the medieval period incredibly rich, but also have networks and contacts across Europe and beyond. And the galleries will really enable people to put the site of Norwich Castle in that wider national and international context, and reflect the fact that this was a spectacular building and is one of the finest vernacular buildings in Western Europe. So it's really sort of reflecting that in the interpretation as well as in the fabric of the building.
Thank you very much for that answer. If I could invite you, Robin, to carry on with the next part of the report.
Thank you, Chair. Section 5.2 just sort of highlights some of the other work that's happening across the site. I've mentioned already design work taking place on a museum, shop and retail space, and I've included a visual of what the new restaurant area will look like, which will be located on the floor above the old shop that will actually house the new shop. Moving on to section 6, Chair, details for members of activities happening across Museum of Norwich and Strangers Hall. Lots of activity taking place, as members would expect. Credit to the small teams based at both sites for their creativity and supported in many cases by colleagues within the wider Norwich Museum setup, including our learning team. Reference again there to the Love Light event, and also curator Hannah Henderson's support for the More for Museum of Us project, working with Tony Robinson, filming here in Norwich. I don't think we yet know the date at which that programme is going to be aired, but we'll keep members informed as soon as we know. Again, in the report, information about other ways in which staff at the Museum of Norwich are plugging into community-wide activities, including the Norfolk and Norwich Festival, and also supporting sort of very much community-based projects. The Museum of Norwich has always had a really strong track record of plugging into the Norwich community, being very much a community asset, and that's sort of indicated by the range of activities referenced in this report, including projects working with the Art at Work CIC, the Garage, and English Plus. So really active team at Museum of Norwich, and again you've got some recent TripAdvisor quotes giving you a feel for not only do they do lots of really good activities, but the core offer itself at Museum of Norwich remains really strong. 6.2 Strangers Hall, similarly, a very proactive, creative team who take every opportunity to promote the museum, as evidenced by the Putting on a Progress educational production by Curious Spark. It's also been a real pleasure to see volunteers returning to Strangers Hall. Strangers Hall saw some of the earliest volunteer returns within the service, both within the garden area and with strict controls in place. Room stewards, who are obviously a key part of the interpretation at Strangers Hall. We know how important volunteering is for people's well-being. Our teams across Norwich and across the service did a really good job of staying in contact with volunteers throughout COVID, and it's been really great that we've been able to get volunteers back doing what they love, getting them back onto our sites. Strangers Hall continues as well to actively collect. I've put in reference in the report to the continuing contemporary collection work linked to the pandemic, so it's creating that record of what was an extraordinary period in our lives, one which will be very quickly sort of not forgotten, but it'll become our past. And both at Strangers Hall and Museum of Norwich, curators working together, actively collecting material that sort of evidence the Norwich aspect of the pandemic. So I included a picture here of a donation of bus posters from Connect Bus, detailing their COVID protocols, which we're all very familiar with now, but I suspect in 5-10 years' time will seem very peculiar. Well, let's hope so. And I think, Chair, I'll pause at that point in terms of the site updates.
Thank you very much, Robin. Are there any comments or questions or observations on that preceding part of the report? No, in which case, Robin, if I could invite you to carry on.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Dr. Francesca Banker, Chief Curator of the Norwich Museums, who's not able to be with us this afternoon. What you've got in section 7 of the report details, as always, of the activities of our specialist curatorial team based in Norwich, but servicing the whole of the Museum Service. Just to pick out a few highlights, so Rosie Gray, our Curator of Modern Contemporary Art, has been very busy recently in preparing the exhibition that's now on show at Norwich Castle, The World We Live In, Art in the Urban Environment, which is an Arts Council touring exhibition. And this marks the first major exhibition in the T galleries, our main exhibition galleries, following the upgrade of environmental systems that Stuart will touch on in a moment. So really good to have those galleries back. They were handed back on schedule, and meant that exhibition could take place, confident that it would be happening within a very robust environment. And a reminder that members of this committee obviously are able to visit any Norwich Museum Service site free of charge. So if you would like to go and see the exhibition, if you haven't done so already, then please do take that opportunity. Rosie is also working on the next major exhibition at Norwich Castle, Slaves of Fashion, which is curated by the Sing Twins. And I think that will attract a lot of interest, both in terms of the subject matter and the range of materials being used, with the read across into our costume and textile collections. So with the world we live in and Slaves of Fashion, two really strong exhibitions making the most of those refurbished galleries up at Norwich Castle. Elsewhere in the report you've got details of all the different activities being undertaken by other curators. The only one I wanted to draw your attention to was Dr. David Waterhouse, our natural history curator, who has been all over the Radio 4 recently and has contributed to a number of Radio 4 programmes, including Open Country, and David's a very powerful advocate for the Norwich Museum Service and for the natural history collections, and has also been very actively involved in promoting Deep History Coast, working with colleagues up in North Norfolk. So as always with these reports, it's just really a snapshot of curatorial activity. The final item I wanted to bring out in this section was relating to Dr. Francesca Banca herself, who is also keeper of fine and decorative art. Francesca was instrumental in the acquisition of the J&W Turner painting Walton Bridges that members will recall came to Norwich, was acquired for Norwich a couple of years ago. That was part of an acquisition largely funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and as part of that acquisition there was also funding to support a tour around Estonia, and it's been well travelled, that painting. It was recently down in Culture and Ipswich Museums on display, and very shortly it's going to be unveiled at the Lynn Museum in King's Lynn, which Francesca thinks is the first time that a Turner painting has been on public display in King's Lynn. And if members are interested, there is an open afternoon at Lynn Museum on the 23rd of June from 2 o'clock onwards, and any members interested in attending that would be very welcome. So that's an open afternoon on the afternoon of the 23rd of June from 2 o'clock onwards. The Turner painting normally resides, as members will be aware, up at Norwich Castle, but it has been earning its keep definitely in the last couple of years as part of this very successful touring show. So it would be great to sort of exhibit it in the west of the county. And I'll pause at that point, Chair.
Thank you very much, Robin. Again, are there any comments, questions or observations? Councillor Birmingham.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't aware that we were allowed to get input free. I've been a member of Norfolk Museums and had a pass for a number of years, so I'll continue. I was very pleased to go to the World We Live In. It's a really excellent exhibition. I haven't seen it all yet, but I would encourage people to go. I was quite interested in a list there is on the wall of the most racist football clubs, and it says at the bottom, and Norwich dropped out of the top 10. So it's worth seeing for that. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. That's intriguing detail. Thank you. Robin, if I could invite you to carry on with the report.
Thank you, Chair. And just to reiterate, as members of the Area Museum Committee, councillors are very welcome to attend free of charge any Norfolk Museum Service site, and all you need to do is to show your ID badge and mention that you're on the Area Committee. If you have any problems, obviously speak to me. Chair, I'm going to hand over at that point to Stuart to talk about Section 8 and 9.
Section 8, Project Refresh. I just wanted to give the committee an update on Project Refresh. I had updated the committee at the last meeting on progress. I'm pleased to say that the Project Refresh has now finished successfully. The project ran from the 8th of November through to the 14th of April this year. For those that are new to the committee, basically what we had was a challenge whereby, if you're familiar with Norwich Castle, we have what we call the Tea Galleries, which are our temporary exhibition galleries, the Norwich Union and the Bernard Matthews Galleries. And historically, we've really struggled to maintain temperature and humidity controls in line with lenders' requirements. Basically, collections need to be, when we take on loan collections for our exhibitions, which obviously are a big part of the overall offer of Norwich Museums, we need to be able to demonstrate that we can maintain adequate levels of temperature and humidity of roughly 20 degrees centigrade and 50% relative humidity. That has always proved to be a really big problem for us because the tea galleries, the Norwich Union and the Bernard Matthews Gallery, were once part of the Victorian prison. They're two separate microclimates in many ways, given that they're two separate, even though the two rooms are connected, they're two very different sized rooms. One of them is an internal room, one of them has external walls, etc. And as a consequence, it made it very, very difficult for us to maintain those levels that we needed to, and therefore put in jeopardy, actually, our ability to take on significant loans and therefore host excellent and international exhibitions. So what we did is, working with colleagues at Norwich City Council, Norfolk County Council, and Norfolk Property Services, is we introduced a new air handling unit for the Bernard Matthews Gallery that separated out the control. So previously we had one air handling unit that used to basically look after both Norwich Union and Bernard Matthews Gallery. What we did is implemented a new air handling unit, a chiller unit, that just served the Bernard Matthews Gallery, leaving the original kit to just service the Norwich Union. So we had that kind of independent control, combined with needing to make changes to the fabric of the building. So that included increasing so that included insulating the building in a much more efficient way. So we had to put additional insulation within the roof points, but also changing the thermocell layer on the walls within the galleries, which also helped to insulate the buildings as well. And I'm pleased to say that it was a success. It represented a significant investment for Norfolk County Council. It's just shy of £1 million, to put it into context, of the new kit that needed to be implemented. And shows the significance and the importance of why we needed to have that kit desperately in order to safeguard, as I say, the ongoing sustainability of being able to host these exhibitions. So I've included there some photographs just so you can see within the report of some of that kit. I know that it's one of those projects where, as I say, we've spent just shy of £1 million, but actually if you walk into the spaces now, you will probably see little or no change. So it's one of those projects where all of the work happened kind of back of house. There was a lot of work that happened within the galleries, but actually the fact that nobody would notice is actually a testament to the project, that that's what we wanted. We didn't want fundamental change within the gallery spaces. It was just the environment that we needed to safeguard. And as I say, I actually went into the gallery this morning to have a look at just how well it was being controlled. Previously, we were out of control by up to 20% humidity at any time, and the temperature would fluctuate within about an 8 degree range. We have a set point of 20 degrees centigrade for temperature, 50 for humidity, and this morning it was exactly 20 degrees centigrade at 50% humidity. So, which hopefully will be the way it will stay, but so far it's proven to be a success. Moving on to section 9,
Councillor Wright there.
Yeah,
sorry,
I was going to do a quick question on section 8.
Of course.
Obviously, you've talked in your reports about this being around protecting the artefacts and making it possible to meet legal obligations. When Robin began the meeting, the first section of the report talked about CO2 monitors and that kind of thing. Although it's not explicitly referenced, is there a knock-on in terms of the air purification that happens and will benefit visitors going around as well as the artefacts there?
Yes, certainly. The government requirements for mitigating the risks from COVID-19 are that, of course, that any premise where you welcome visitors or customers in needs to have either mechanical or natural ventilation. We don't have any windows, obviously, within those gallery spaces, so the air handling unit itself does act as a form of mechanical ventilation. It incorporates, and this is where we've had to change the way in which we use the mechanical systems of the castle, in that we now set them to a minimum of 20% fresh air at all times. So regardless of, which is also again really why it was really good timing for us with Project Refresh, because by refurbishing the old kit and introducing the new kit, it means they don't have to work so hard. And so where we would previously suffer within the extremities of the summer and the winter, because the external temperature and humidity has an impact on that, it means now that we can set them at 20% fresh air all year round, which means it's providing fresh air as a mitigation for COVID-19, but also has the capacity to actually be able to control the humidity and temperature in the gallery space itself. So yeah, we do monitor the CO2 levels within the space, but it's not an area that we're concerned about because it has that robust mechanical ventilation.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Stuart. Councillor Ward.
Yes, thank you. Just to comment on the teapots. I was at Blickling, the event on Saturday night, and saw our museum stand there with all the handling teapots, and that was generating a lot of interest, especially amongst the young people. I was pleased to see on page 38 my teapot, which I've got one exactly the same as that, together with a set at home. And that particular one is in Jarrell's window, so it's a very good window if you haven't seen it.
Thank you very much. That's great to hear. Stuart, if I can pass back to you.
Thank you. So moving on to section 9, the Shire Hall courtroom. In 2019, it was discovered that we have a significant outbreak of dry rot within our historic courtroom within the Shire Hall. For those that haven't ever been within the courtroom or seen it, we have an authentic Victorian come Georgian courtroom within the Shire Hall, which was used as an active courtroom right up until the mid-80s, before when the Shire Hall, of course, was the county Crown Courts, before they moved to the new Crown Court site. At the time, there were two courtrooms within the Shire Hall. One of them at the time was, members may remember, was changed into the Norfolk Regimental Museum, and the idea was the other one would be kept for all time as an authentic courtroom. Unfortunately, as I say, we discovered this dry rot outbreak in 2019, which started off as being just a very, very small piece of fungus that appeared underneath some timber. But of course, as always the case with dry rot, as we started to sort of make further investigations and start to peel back some of the fabric, we actually realised it was a significant outbreak, which actually, within its coverage, its area of coverage, represents about 25% of the courtroom space. Within some of the photographs there, you can actually see the extent of some of that dry rot, where you can see that it's prevalent not only within the structural timbers of the courtroom itself, which make up the seating area, but also around historic windows, and most alarmingly, and most recently, we discovered that it's actually within the structural timbers of the roof as well. So works have been ongoing with using specialist contractors and liaison with Norwich City Council conservation officer teams to identify to identify means to remedy the dry rot and come up with methodology that will be both sympathetic to the building in terms of its historic nature, but also, of course, achieve its objectives. And so we're at the point now where we're just about ready to go for full planning permission, because we've identified, as I say, those remedial works and that methodology, but it is a significant piece of work that is going to take a courtroom out of action for between the next 6 to 12 months. And you can see some photographs there as well of the extent of the bird nest scaffolding within the courtroom itself, because we've needed to get access to the, as I say, to the roof voids, and also scaffolding at the rear of the building outside, where we're trying to address the cause of the problem and stop any water ingress, which of course can cause the dry rot to start to spread once more. It's quite an interesting, for those who don't know, it's quite an interesting little fungus. It actually lives dormant for many years, decades in fact, hundreds of years. And it lives within the brickwork, and if the conditions are right, which is a warm and damp environment, it will then start spreading through the brickwork, trying to find timber of which it can then effectively eat. And once you've got dry rot, effectively you can't get rid of it. It's very, very difficult. So in terms of the remedial works going forward, and unfortunately for us, the courtroom, of course, is nearly all made, apart from the external brickwork shell. The actual courtroom itself is all timber. And so in order to be able to safeguard it, the interventions include needing to place a steel barrier between brickwork and timber throughout the courtroom in order to create effectively a physical barrier to stop that dry rot from being able to spread should we have future water ingress issues. So I will of course keep the committee updated as to progress with the Shire Hall courtroom. Is there any questions on, the courtroom before I move on to business numbers and social media?
No, I don't think there are. Thank you for that update, Stuart. If you could move on to the next part of the report.
In section 10, business numbers, I've included there the visitor numbers for the last 3 years for Norwich museums. Members will see that there's an awful lot, unfortunately, of grey blackouts there on the table. Of course, that represents the COVID-19 lockdowns, whereby we needed to close the site. So, unfortunately, looking at it, there's not an awful lot of year-on-year comparison that can be made. However, what we've seen for the start of this year, 2022, is from January through to April, we've actually seen a really significant uplift in visitor numbers year on year. So February, 8,100, of course, bolstered by February half term. March had a very decent 6,600, all things considered, with taking into account the extensive key project works. And then April, 8,129, which is a really good start to this financial year, and shows that visitors are certainly becoming more confident in coming back to inside spaces post COVID-19. Thank you.
And Chair, if I can just say a few words about social media. So as normal, what we'll do is attach to the minutes of this meeting a social media update which gives members a snapshot across all of the Norwich museums in terms of social media activity. Just to pick out a few headlines, across the Norwich Museum there are now over 65,000 followers across the 4 platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube. We're continuing to see really good levels of engagement, so not just people clicking on things once, but actually going deeper into content. And again, within the report that will circulate, there'll be that information if members would like to dig into it a little bit deeper. We've also seen the continuing success of the Norwich Castle blog, which includes information about the project, but also other aspects of the collection. There's been a lot of interest recently in the Lego Norwich Castle that some members may have spotted in the EDP, built by a local enthusiast. We've also seen continuing development of content on YouTube, again much of it linking into the Norwich Castle redevelopment project, and we've had just over 7,000 YouTube views on that content in the past 3 months. And we're also continuing to develop new social media activity. So we have a trainee in our digital comms team, Brannick, who's one of our teaching museum trainees, and those have been developing new Norwich Castle Instagram content, which provides sort of filmed snippets of conversations with curators, and they've had over 22,000 views since launching in the middle of April. As you would expect, we're continuing to support campaigns with social media activity, including Women's History Month, Women's International Women's Day, and the National Lottery Heritage Funds, thanks to you. So the team continue to be very busy supporting social media. We have a digital officer based in Norwich, but also a lot of the curators and other staff across the Norwich museums are very active in providing content which is then curated in a way that makes it original and ensures that we're continuing to deliver really good quality social media outputs. So we'll include a copy of the more detailed report, Chair, within the minutes of the meeting. And I think, Chair, that concludes our report.
Thank you very much, Robin, and thank you very much for just outlining the excellent online provision that's been made. Thank you very much to both you and Stuart for that report. We move on now to item 8, which is reports from voluntary organisations. We have a written report, I hope all members of the committee have this in front of them, from Friends of Norwich Museums that Felicity Devonshire has provided. I'd simply just like to note the centenary lunch that took place at Houghton Hall for the Friends of Norwich Museum, and also that there was the exhibition at Houghton Hall celebrating 300 years since the founding. I don't think we've got representatives of East Anglia Art Fund.
Chair, no, sorry, we've had apologies from Amanda Gatler and Indonesia.
Okay, so we don't have either of those present for today's meeting, which means we move on to item 9, which is just to acknowledge the forthcoming dates for the rest of the civic year, which we'll formally take as acknowledged, if that's okay. Thank you very much, everybody. We've now got a presentation on the museum collection.